So today, I just sometimes, a lot of people are always asking me what I'm influenced by, and I'm very hesitant to share a lot of that information, mostly because I feel that when it comes to energy, spiritual practice, finding our voices, that we should be on a journey of our own to do so. And when I began my journey years ago, I think I even started in high school. I went to the New Age. It was like the 80s. So I went to the New Age shop, I believe in Albany. And I found books that resonated with my interests at the time. And that's usually what I tell people is if you are starting to open up to your spirituality or finding yourself or your interest in energy or any of the words that you want to use, the best way to do that is to start to follow your interests. And through following your interests, you will start to find books, you will start to find people, you will start to find classes, you will start to find things on Instagram or on YouTube that align with what you are looking for. Sometimes I do ask for guidance from other people, or if I see somebody reading something or watching something, of course, I go there because I'm interested. And so I'm always hesitant to tell people my exact journey because I do feel that it's a personal process and where I'm led is going to be different from where you might be led. And I think we all talk the same language, but sometimes the words are different. So I think it's really important to listen to your own voice and your own path. Now, that all being said, I did feel, inclined to share a few things that I'm reading because I really started getting interested in these philosophers from the early 1900s, late 1800s, mainly because it's also the time period where psychotherapy started to birth and the surrealist movement came out of this and the spiritualist movement. And those are all things that I'm inspired by in my practice and in my artwork. So I also love to read and I love history. So I've been seeking out these voices, and it's really interesting to me how, the collective consciousness, as Jung framed it, but the collective the collective in itself has sort of gone through these waves. And so there was this whole birth in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was a re-emergence of studying unconscious, subconscious philosophies from the East, and really exploring them in groups and dialogues and getting together, mostly men at the time, as far as getting together in coffee houses and discussing it. But there were a lot of women that also took this and sort of explored it in their own way and different ways. And if we think back to that time period, another interesting thing, obviously we didn't have the internet, and people learned from discussion and in books. And so there were a lot of in-person groups happening to discuss the books that were happening. But obviously, if a book came out in Russia, as this one, P.D. Ouspensky, who I have been reading. It's a little hard to read. It's a little thick. But, he was a Russian philosopher and writer. And so his book coming out in Russia isn't going to get to people who are in Mexico right away, right? Because if we think about the way things were in the, early 1900s, it takes time. And then, there's these wars that happened, World War I and World War II. And at that time, things like resources and materials were scarce and people. So people went more into the survival space of literally having to survive because the war was happening and leaving all of their things, and resources were going towards war, not necessarily towards making books and making art and making coffee houses. So we have to look at the history and our time periods to really see where spirituality, where energy has moved forward and where it has closed down. And I think it's really important right now, where we are in this world, to take this into consideration, because when you look at the patterns, which is the way I usually work, when I work with people, whether it be in an emotional way, a spiritual way, a physical way, I look for the patterns. And so when you look for these patterns, there's these births of spiritual awakenings, and then a shutdown that usually goes into survival mode and scarcity. And then again, it tries to birth itself again, right? So in the 1960s, we see it birthing again. And then the 1960s, we also see a lot of trying to change the ways as we rebirth into this. We start to see things that are injustices, and we try to change those things. Well, some people do. And it's interesting, because then there's this fight and this closed down. And again, we go into the 80s and it's like shut down as if nothing ever happened. And there's a struggle happening. And so I do feel that by looking to the patterns of history and marking that with these patterns with spirituality, we are in one of those rebirths again. And I do feel that we're going into this period where we have to be cautious, because I think that as much as there was a spiritual awakening, we are being hit in a different way now with fear and scarcity that could possibly shut it down. And so I think in me raising my voice recently and speaking out about my truth and who I am, it's not because I just found it. I mean, if you know me, I've been speaking out about this stuff for a long time, but I haven't been super public because it's not what I was leaning and leading with. I think it's really important now that as many of us are speaking out as possible, because I do feel that there's this fine line we're entering into in this world where it could easily be shut down again in fear and scarcity. And I don't think that that's where we should go. So going back to what I was talking about. So there are these two books that I've been reading. One is, like I said, P.D. Ouspensky. And if I show it to you, it's going to be backwards, because, I'm on Zoom. But he has two books, actually. One is this one, which is In Search of the Miraculous, and the other one is The Fourth Dimension. The Fourth Dimension was the book that actually took off, that became very powerful and an inspiration to a lot of people in the surrealist movement. And so I actually came to it because I am a huge follower of Leonora Carrington's work, and I know that this book was a huge influence for her and many people within her community in the surrealist movement. So it's interesting to read. A lot of it is, it's a dense book, so there's a lot in there. But he talks a lot about the subconscious and the unconscious, and really trying to explore these ideas that he was seeing coming from the East. For him, mostly influenced by India and yoga principles, and one of the gurus that he found. So it is an interesting book to read. Now, I also have been reading read this other book that I think I read a while back and used for my thesis in graduate school, but have revisited it because it's on my bookshelf, and it's called The Middle Pillar by Israel Regardie. Now, mine looks like this, lots of bookmarks. I think it's somewhat easy to find. I don't know where I got this one because it's so old, but it was first published in 1938. So 1938. So a lot of the ideas that people are talking about right now in the world as their new ideas have actually been around for a very long time. And I think it's a very important thing to understand that the things that are coming out into the world right now, these ideas that people have, they're not new ideas. These have been floating around forever, and we just put different words to them, different languages to them, our interpretations. And that's what's supposed to happen. We are supposed to digest the information, align it to how we feel, and see, what comes out of that. So these are not new ideas. Anyway, I do find it curious, though, because during the 1930s was also around the time that psychotherapy was actually a newish science. Like Ouspensky talks about it as well in his book, and I think his book was from this one, maybe the early 1900s, like 1908 or something like that, where this is where the psychotherapists that I study, like Wilhelm Reich and Freud, they both were coming around this time period, and in discussion of the mental body, and this was also the spiritual body. Jung also around this time, right? And we know a lot about his studies of the unconscious. These are not principles that these people, these men, created. These are ideas that they read and explored through science in this new field of psychotherapy. The importance about Reich and Freud is they were very aligned for a very long period of time, and then they split because their ideas started to separate. Wilhelm Reich, who was from Austria, also had, he was somebody I was very influenced by, because a lot of his ideas were also based in this idea of the body, the physical body. So consciousness, unconsciousness, the physical body, our movements, and how that changes our minds. Now, if we think about it, I know there's a lot of Pilates people that follow me. The very interesting thing here is that, Joseph Pilates also came from Austria, right? He was born in Austria. He also was born around the same time period. And so when we give all this credit to Joseph Pilates, and yes, I do think that his workouts, his movements are, very genius. It's important to understand the history. Again, I'm going back to that. Like, we need to learn our history. Because Joseph Pilates, coming out of this time period, Reich had already been established doing a lot of research and creating workouts that are very similar. So I think it's important to see the influences in all of our teachers, and it, not to give credit, not to like put check marks, but because they become these threads for how we then take in the information and how we can put our own imprints on it. So that's why. But I do want to just read some things from this book by Israel Regardie. I know I'm pronouncing his name wrong, and I apologize for that. I should have looked that up. That's my fault. So some of the things that he talks about, which I find very interesting, is this idea of the emergence of psychotherapy, or as he says, psychology. I don't know if psychotherapy actually was a thing back then, but at this point it was psychology. So he talks a lot about this bridge between psychology and magic. And at first, when I read that, I was like, I wonder what he means by magic. But I have to say, his idea of magic is exactly the same as mine, because I don't always align to witchcraft. I usually use the word magic, just because it feels better to me. And one of the things that he states is, as a practical system, magic is concerned not so much with analysis as with bringing into operation the creative and intuitive parts of man. So he talks about also a psychological technique can never be a wholly integrative one until it accepts the spiritual side of man and assists the analysand in the recognition of or acquaintance with its activity. Later, he says, if analysis aims to the acceptance of the unconscious and the validity of its coexistence in consciousness, then magic may be said to be a technique for realizing the deeper levels of the unconscious. Now, I'm not sure as far as who was influenced by who, but I do know that a lot of these psychologists and philosophers and scientists and, movers were all around the same places in Europe during the same time periods. Sometimes it overlapped, and sometimes it was at the exact same moment. Sometimes they knew each other, and sometimes they knew of each other, because our world was smaller back then. So the things that I find very interesting is that this information has been out there for so long and written about, philosophized about, put into science, and we still, as a collective, are trying to fight it. Why are we still trying to fight it? Why are we still trying to look for proof? I think we're holding back so many people. And so I guess the shorter, I guess what I'm trying to say here is it is very important to understand our histories. It is very important to revisit science and books, philosophers, and time periods. But it's also very important at this point to really understand and know that what our world needs right now is to just move forward with this belief that to be intuitive, to believe in the unconscious, to believe in the power of the subconscious, that why are we not just doing it? Why are we still philosophizing about its truth or its belief? Why are we not embodying it? Why is it not just part of our practice? Why is it not embedded in every single thing that we're doing? Why isn't intuition validated? Because if we already know that in 1938, the importance of the unconscious or magic as an intuitive practice and psychology could be a benefit for healing, then why are we not incorporating it into our practices now? And if we already know that being intuitive can help our bodies heal because we know that we can reprogram the subconscious mind, why is it not part of our healing process? Why is it not part of our medical process? Why is it not part of our health process? And if we know that, I don't remember the years, but I know that like ancient times they were using hypnosis before we developed anesthesia, so that they could hypnotize people so that their bodies didn't get sick during the operation. And they didn't necessarily, so they would use hypnosis so the bodies wouldn't feel the surgery and the pain of it, but they also used hypnosis so that they wouldn't get sick from bacteria and from infection. And they used it at the time to further the healing, to make it easier. So this was used, God, I don't know the dates. I know that it was, during Greek and Roman times, they talk about it. I guess as far as recorded history, it was pretty much recorded. I don't know the dates on that, but I know it was like ancient histories. And so if we used hypnosis then and it worked, and then all of a sudden we stop using it, it's not because it doesn't work. So yes, obviously modern medicine is amazing. And I'm not saying don't go to modern medicine. I think we need what the doctors have created and researched, but I'm just saying, why can't it be both? Why can't we have psychology and magic? Why can't we have modern medicine and hypnosis and whole health, right? Like, and holistic approaches? Why can't we have both? Why does it have to be one or the other? And I know that as is now, a lot of it has to do with money and ease and training. And it's just a question that I ponder because I get a lot of pushback in the way that I practice. And I have never said to any of my clients, don't go and seek modern medical help ever, never, because I see the value in it. But I also feel that there has to be the value in the other, which is magic, energy, holistic health. So just a question. That's what I'm thinking about today.